Relying on a single country for arms procurement can have serious implications for national security. Countries like Armenia, India, and Indonesia have faced challenges arising from this dependence. For India, the situation was historically unavoidable. During the Cold War, the United States was unwilling to supply advanced weapons to India, choosing instead to arm military dictatorships, including India's adversaries. While France and Israel supported India's defense needs, Russia emerged as the primary supplier of defense products, enabling India to win critical wars. However, the contributions of Israel and France during the Kargil War remained significant. Although India encountered challenges with Russian weapons, such as supply chain disruptions and spare part shortages, Russia consistently delivered when needed. Their defense partnership also played a crucial role in helping India develop indigenous defense systems. The Soviets notably entrusted India, rather than China, with the MiG-21 first. However, not all nations enjoy the same level of partnership. Countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, and Malaysia have heavily relied on Russian equipment, including fighter jets, tanks, helicopters, and air defense systems. Many of these systems, such as the T-90 tanks and Sukhoi fighters, were licensed manufactured in India. When these nations faced issues with Russian defense equipment, and Russia was unavailable, India stepped in. Leveraging decades of experience with Russian systems, India provided spare parts, training, and technical support to Indonesia, Vietnam, and Malaysia. For Vietnam specifically, India also trained personnel to operate Kilo-class submarines, which India has been using for years. This collaboration has matured into a broader trust in India's indigenous weapon systems, as many nations are now hesitant to depend on Russia for arms. Due to stretched resources, sanctions, and other constraints, even India faces challenges in this regard. Armenia too is grappling with this reality. The sanctions imposed on Russia, especially under the CAATSA, have further complicated arms supplies. Western systems, particularly those from the US, often face compatibility issues with Russian or Soviet origin equipment, which forms the backbone of the armed forces in many of these countries. The US often imposes strict conditions on how and where exported defense systems can be used. The process of diversifying defense suppliers has also presented challenges. For example, transitioning has been a time and resource-intensive endeavor for a country like India, which has a legacy fleet of Russian origin systems. While India has acquired advanced platforms from the US, such as Apache helicopters and Chinook transporters, these remain relatively minor in comparison to the extensive inventory of Russian origin systems that still dominate its arsenal. This challenge offers important lessons for countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, and the Philippines as they consider diversifying their own defense procurements. Acquiring compatible equipment is often easier than replacing entire arsenals with Western technology. In this context, countries, especially from Southeast Asia, are increasingly looking at other players like South Korea and India. The BrahMos missile system, a joint venture with Russia, is a notable example. But does the Russian involvement in such systems trigger CAATSA sanctions? The answer is likely no. BrahMos Aerospace has achieved 75% indigenization of components, with plans to reach 100% by 2026. Even at its current level, BrahMos is unlikely to fall under CAATSA's purview. The act targets significant transactions with sanctioned Russian entities, focusing on direct purchases of new military systems or upgrades. Joint ventures like BrahMos, where Russia's role is secondary, do not qualify. India leads the BrahMos venture and has minimized dependence on Russian components. The key Russian inputs are limited to the ramjet engine and guidance system, which form only a small part of the missile. With the sanctions hurdle addressed, what makes BrahMos so appealing? Its specifications set it apart. The missile boasts 9 times the kinetic energy of subsonic cruise missiles, capable of causing catastrophic damage even without a warhead. For instance, it could devastate a destroyer with a direct hit. But the real draw is the operational autonomy it offers. Unlike the US-made Typhoon missile system, which is temporarily deployed in the Philippines for exercises, the BrahMos provides full operational control. Countries like Indonesia and Vietnam, on the verge of signing the agreement with India, value this independence. China's aggressive policies and militarization continue to alienate Southeast Asian nations, even as it issues warnings to those acquiring capabilities like the BrahMos missile. China has dismissed the BrahMos missile as a non-threat, arguing, perhaps rightly, that it alone cannot counter its extensive naval dominance. The dismissal overlooks an important point. The missile's range may limit its threat to mainland China, but it can still effectively target several militarized islands in the South China Sea. These islands, while heavily fortified, are static targets vulnerable to precision strikes by BrahMos. This shifts the strategic calculus, complicating China's dominance and deterring aggressive actions. Armenia's case is distinct. Reports suggest it is in talks with India for BrahMos missiles. Unlike Southeast Asian nations, Armenia's conflict with Azerbaijan is immediate and existential. For Armenia, any tool that could counterbalance Azerbaijan's technological and strategic edge, like the BrahMos, would likely be used if the situation demanded it. Even advanced air defense systems like Azerbaijan's Barak 8 cannot guarantee interception of a supersonic missile. This has been evident in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, where no air defense system has proven foolproof. India is aggressively pitching defense partnerships with nations challenging China, including Vietnam, the Philippines, and Indonesia. However, this wasn't always the case. Vietnam, for instance, has long been interested in BrahMos. Initially, India hesitated to export the missile to avoid upsetting China. But the June 2020 Galwan Valley clash marked a decisive change. What further enhances India's appeal is its financial assistance, particularly through lines of credit. These offer higher credit limits and lower interest rates than traditional loans. This mechanism has already facilitated BrahMos exports to the Philippines and could play a vital role for other nations. For India, they enable defense exports, strengthen its Indo-Pacific strategy, and showcase the quality of its indigenous systems. But we can't forget the Russia factor. Russia and China have publicly described their relationship as not allies, but better than allies, signaling a deep strategic partnership. Given this dynamic, why does Russia permit India to export the BrahMos missiles to countries that have disputes with China? As a joint venture, any export of BrahMos requires mutual agreement between India and Russia. Yet Russia has not only agreed but also benefits financially from these sales, even though it risks losing potential markets for its own missile systems, like the Onyx. A key reason for this might lie in the CAATSA sanctions. If a country were to purchase Russia's Onyx missile directly, it could trigger US sanctions. By channeling such transactions through India, which is progressively indigenizing the BrahMos, this risk is significantly reduced. Another factor is Russia's current inability to meet global defense demands due to its resource constraints and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Moscow is struggling to supply its own military needs, leaving little capacity to cater to international buyers. In this context, India, one of Russia's few remaining friendly nations, acts as an effective intermediary. Allowing India to supply systems like BrahMos even to countries with disputes against China aligns with Russia's interests in maintaining influence in these regions. The case of the Philippines is a prime example. Russia could have vetoed the BrahMos sale to the Philippines, but it did not. Similarly, Armenia, despite remaining within Russia's sphere of influence, has been procuring Indian defense systems with no resistance from Moscow. This suggests that Russia sees the presence of Indian systems in these countries as a preferable alternative to Western systems. In today's geopolitical climate, having a trusted partner like India is a luxury for Russia. It likely values India's role as a strategic counterbalance in regions where Moscow's own influence is waning. Ultimately, This partnership highlights the pragmatic choices nations make in an increasingly polarized world.